Hello everybody, I'm Zenith Warrior Princess, the cutest of buns, and welcome back my friends to Zen Movies, where I take a look at one of the numerous different films in my collection. Before we discuss today's film, I just want to take a step back and break character for a bit because today marks the 1-year anniversary of the Bun Squad. It seems like only yesterday that Filip and I sat down together and decided to remake the videos from my old channel. While we haven't quite got around to all the old videos, we've been at it a whole year now, created 24 episodes of both new and old content, started a long-running storyline, and got to work with so many talented creators who agreed to appear on my channel. It may seem like a small milestone for most people, but it's a big thing for me. I first started making videos on November 10th, 2010, and in the 10 years that I've been making videos, I have never been as consistent or as productive as I was this year, and I owe a lot of that to Filip. We have a schedule now that actually gets videos out on time. We have a team of people and a cast of characters and actual lore for the channel. We have so many videos that I'm proud of and so many more that are scripted and ready to be worked on, and I can't wait to show you. So, for the first time on my show, happy anniversary Bun Squad, and here's to many, many more. With that out of the way, let's stop leaning on the fourth wall and return to the episode in progress. Since today marks the 1-year anniversary of the Bun Squad, I wanted to talk about something special to me. While my esteemed colleague Linkara likes to review Clone Saga comics for his anniversary, I wanted to go a different route. I decided to choose a film that was very close to my heart, but also one that I had an interesting and somewhat complicated history with. Today we're taking a look at Scott Pilgrim vs. the World as we see a comic come to life right before our very eyes. Subsequently, since we are discussing an adaptation of a comic book series, welcome back my friends to Licensed Media Limbo. So, without further ado, let's place this movie into a limbo state and see if it's worth your time as an adaptation.
Not without me, you're not!
What do you mean?
I mean, you're not reviewing Scott Pilgrim without me.
But we just did a collaboration a month and a half ago on Monster Prom. Why should we do another one so soon?
3 reasons. 1, this is my favorite movie of all time, and I am not gonna miss the chance to talk about how much I love it. 2, I have read the comics, something which you yourself haven't done.
Hey! You can't just go and assume that.
Oh really? Well, tell me, have you read the comics?
Well,
My point exactly. And 3? Well, after helping you with all these videos for a year, can't I just join you in celebrating the anniversary? I mean, come on, this is supposed to be a happy occasion, is it not? Can't I just join in on it?
Well, you do have a point there. Alright Phil, you win. You can join me for this review, but after this, no more collabs. For a while anyway. I have a feeling I may need your help with other reviews, especially when it comes to Fate.
Deal. Now let's tackle this baby already.
Indeed. Well, ladies, gentlemen, and others, happy 1-year anniversary. This is Scott Pilgrim vs. the World.
We are Sex Bomb! 1, 2, 3, 4!
Scott Pilgrim is a name that's been thrown around a lot when it comes to talking about cult movies and comic books, but for those who aren't aware of him or his series, allow us to give you a bit of a history lesson. Scott Pilgrim began life as a comic book series created, written, and drawn by Brian Lee O'Malley. The first of 6 volumes was released on August 18th in 2004, and it became a huge hit amongst comic fans. O'Malley was inspired to create the series, as well as the lead it's named after, when he listened to a single by the Canadian band Plumtree titled Scott Pilgrim, which is a song that the singer Carla Gillis describes as positive, but also bittersweet. O'Malley wanted to make the comic a shonen-esque story, however the only shonen that he had read at the time was Ranma 1/2. So he went digging and soon he found inspiration in the form of the book Even a Monkey Can Draw manga, written by Koji Aihara and Kentaro Takekuma, which was given to him by a roommate during the making of his first graphic novel, Lost at Sea. Despite the book's satirical tone, O'Malley found it to be a great guide on the Japanese comic book industry, or the manga industry if you're going to be pedantic about it.
Still, I think the title is a bit facetious. I mean, I've never encountered any monkeys who can draw manga. They're too busy writing Shakespeare on typewriters.
If you're done taking a book title at face value, can I please get back to talking about the history?
Alright.
Anyway, while O'Malley expected Scott Pilgrim to sell around 1,000 copies, he was in for a shock when the series sold millions and when he was approached to produce a movie adaptation of his work. I know this may sound cliche to say, but it must have felt so damn good for a passion project to receive that kind of attention when you weren't expecting it to at all. The comics as a whole are very good and something that we'll definitely be taking a deeper look into later down the line. But that is not what we are here to discuss today. Because after the release of the first volume, O'Malley's publisher Oni Press had contacted Universal Studios in regards to making a film adaptation, which was then handed over to a then new film director, and man of my fucking dreams, Edgar Wright.
Edgar Wright is a well-known film director by now, but for those not familiar with his work, he's directed Shaun of the Dead, one of my favorite zombie films for the sheer hilarity of it, The Adventures of Tintin, and Baby Driver, which have all been well regarded. His films do have a tendency, like Carpenter's, to have a poor initial release, but become cult classics after a few years. His Three Flavors Cornetto trilogy, in particular, is referenced a lot on social media, but these 3 flicks went under the radar for most people at the time. I'm a huge fan of Edgar Wright myself, and there hasn't been a film in his library that I haven't absolutely loved. However, back in the summer of 2010, when the film first released, I had no idea who Wright was. I was just a kid who was really into comic books thanks to a friend at summer camp introducing me to all of Linkara's videos. I had gone to a comic shop that summer and ordered the entirety of 52 and the Darkwing Duck comics from Boom Studios when I was given a few free vouchers to see an advanced screening of this new film, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Since I was working at camp at the time, I took 4 of my friends to see the film, and I was just blown away. I loved the film back then, and that advanced screening was a big memory for me. I will always treasure that viewing, although there are further details I'll bring up later in the review that somewhat complicate this experience for me, but we will get to that in a bit.
For me personally, I was actually introduced to Scott Pilgrim around the time it came out. I was 10 years old at the time and I saw the trailer for it on YouTube. This was around the time I actually started using YouTube more and more, and I found out that I could actually view trailers for movies that were coming out online. Gee, what a fucking novel concept that was. I saw the trailer for Scott Pilgrim vs. the World and I was blown away. I thought the movie looked so freaking cool and I remember really wanting to see it. And then I didn't for whatever reason. If I had to hazard a guess, I assume all of my attention was on Toy Story 3. Nothing else movie related really mattered to me at the time. And then I just kind of forgot about it. It was a movie that looked really cool to me that I just didn't get around to seeing. And that was about it. That was until I stumbled across a let's play of the video game Scott Pilgrim vs. the World the Game by Clement J642. I was a big fan of his at the time, still am to this day, and when I saw that he had done a playthrough of the game, my first thought was, oh yeah, that movie, I completely forgot about it. Followed by my second thought, wait, there was a game? It was thanks to this let's play that I also found out that Scott Pilgrim was a comic book series. So just a few weeks later, I nabbed a copy of the Blu-ray, which I still own to this very day, and I proceeded to watch the film. And holy shit, I fell in love. This is a movie that I hold on the same level as other greats like Spider-Man 2 and Lilo and Stitch, as in it is one of my favorite movies of all time. Actually, scratch that, it is my favorite movie of all time, and although I didn't jump on them immediately, when I saw that my high school's library had copies of each individual volume of the comic, I binged the whole series in a week. It's a shame that by that point the game had already been delisted, something which Brian Lee O'Malley himself has made it his life goal to try and reverse. Glad he ended up succeeding. For now though, let's jump into this cult classic and fully dissect why the two of us love it so much. Oh, and also, on my end, I'll be comparing the film to the comic a lot in this review, both to see what changed and also to see if the changes made to the film are still worthwhile, even if they may not be as in-depth as the comic.
The story of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World revolves around the titular Scott Pilgrim, who's a bass player in a band called Sex Bob-omb, which is possibly the best band title ever.
Yeah, get used to that, folks. Video game references are this series' drug and it can't stop taking it. Admittedly though, the comic went even crazier in this regard, to the point where Scott's original band in high school was even named Sonic and Knuckles. Yeah, not even a play on words like Sex Bob-omb, just Sonic and Knuckles. It's blatant, but I love it.
Along with Scott, the band is composed of Steven Stills, the talent and lead singer, Kim Pine, the drummer, and one of Scott's ex-girlfriends, and young Neil, who's not actually a part of the band, although he also plays bass guitar. Scott himself has had a sordid history with relationships in the past, and after his last girlfriend, Natalie, dumped him during the previous year, he's taking to doing the thing most people do when they are in their mourning period. Decided to date someone random to get over his ex-girlfriend. Unfortunately, he decides to date a high school girl named Knives Chow, which earns him the ire of most of his group of friends, including Kim. Especially Kim. Now, part of this is because Scott and Kim used to date, but there's also a history there that was only shown in the comics, as well as the animated short Scott Pilgrim vs. the Animation. Still, his gay roommate, Wallace Wells, and his sister both tell him that this relationship isn't healthy for him, even if it's just part of the mourning period, and also, it's really not fair to Knives at all.
This setup, right off the bat, is perfect in telling the audience one crucial fact about our main character. He isn't a very good person.
Is Scott here?
You know what? He just left.
He can do pretty shitty things and then dodge responsibility for them due to, honestly, just not wanting to be bothered with it. Mental laziness at its finest, if you ask me.
The big focus that I see in Scott Pilgrim is on characters who have gone through trauma in their lives or have been through bad relationships, and this has caused them to withdraw and become worse people as a result. Scott Pilgrim as a whole is about them overcoming these issues and beginning to move forward. We can see from the very beginning how insecure Scott is, and while he doesn't want to take responsibility for what he's doing to Knives, you can clearly see the effect that Natalie had on him and why he doesn't want to take responsibility. This all comes to a head when a girl named Ramona Flowers starts to appear in his dreams, and he becomes completely infatuated with her. He starts to think he's losing it until he spots Ramona while on a date with Knives, and this changes everything. This is the first time he's truly loved someone since Natalie, the girl who dumped him, changed her name to Envy, and left to be the lead singer of the Clash at Demon Head, and it pushes everything from his mind, including poor Knives.
He soon meets Ramona at a party hosted by Steven's ex-girlfriend, Julie, and it doesn't really go over well. Despite this, Scott becomes so obsessed with her that he ends up ordering a package from Amazon.ca, where she works as a delivery girl, just so he can awkwardly ask her out. After he sees her arriving at his house in another one of his dreams, he wakes up to find out that Ramona is actually there ringing the doorbell. When he opens the door, Scott confesses the fact that he's been dreaming about her directly to Ramona, to which she confirms that he isn't crazy. Or maybe he is crazy, but he's not crazy about this. Ramona has access to a subspace highway that goes through Scott's head, which allows her to get through places much faster. This is how Scott was able to see her in his dreams. He asks her if she wants to hang out, to which Ramona reluctantly obliges, and the two have a rather decent night just shooting the shit and almost having sex at Ramona's place.
The next morning, Scott asks Ramona if she'd like to go to a band competition that Scott's taking part in, to which she once again accepts. At the competition, Sex Bob-omb is interrupted by a man named Matthew Patel, who claims to be the first member of the League of Evil Exes. After defeating Patel in a fight that simply kicks ass, Ramona tells Scott that if they're going to date, he'll have to defeat her 7 evil exes. Scott agrees to this because, at this point, he's pretty knee-deep in this whole mess, and he's still head over heels for Ramona. So, at this point, he's willing to do anything if it means getting together with her. Little does he know, though, that Ramona's 7th evil ex and the mastermind behind the whole League of Evil Exes, Gideon Graves, already has a tight grip on Ramona, and taking him down is going to be harder than Scott thinks. That, my friends, is the setup for Scott Pilgrim vs. the World.
To start off, can I just say that the first 35 minutes of this movie are adapted wonderfully from the first volume of the comic? A lot of these scenes are even carried over word for word, and the surprising part is that it all feels natural, and you hardly notice that this was dialogue written for a comic book, not for a film. Well, actually, I'm lying. It isn't really all that surprising, since when writing the comic, O'Malley scripted each chapter as if he was writing a screenplay, which really shows when the volume has its words quoted verbatim in the movie. There's only a few scenes left out of the film, primarily the second dream Scott has of Ramona, and the scene in which Scott meets Knives on the bus for the first time, the latter of which being a deleted scene from the film. Seeing how good I already think the first volume of Scott Pilgrim is, it's no wonder that the first 35 minutes of the film are so brilliant to me.
Admittedly, one of the few faults I do have is that it does take so long to get to that first fight with Matthew Patel. I don't find it boring, but I think it's a tad slower paced than it could have been, since it's cramming an entire volume of backstory and character introductions into this portion of the film. It's not bad stuff, because I love the entire movie, but I do feel they could have brought up the exes perhaps just a little sooner. Just my personal nitpick though, and not a major flaw of the film.
I can see what you're getting at, especially because it means that the content from the remaining 5 volumes has to be sped through for the next hour of the film. And even then, the amount of content that's actually covered from those volumes varies greatly. Volume 2 is half adapted, but there's a lot of stuff that's missing, such as the confrontation between Ramona and Knives, which was actually moved to the end of the film, as well as the flashback for Scott and Kim, which was saved for Scott Pilgrim vs. the animation. Volume 3 is abridged pretty heavily, with the stuff with Envy in the film only being a few scenes, whereas in Volume 3, it's a storyline that lasts for a few days. Volume 4 is skipped over entirely, with the exception of some throwaway lines and the introduction of Roxy, the 4th evil ex. Almost all of the contents of this volume barely even feature in the film, including the subplot with Knives' dad who has it out for Scott, the entire plot surrounding Roxy, and the reintroduction of Lisa, Scott's friend from high school who was shown in the flashback at the start of Volume 2, and in the movie only gets a passing mention from Julie. Volume 5 is also largely missing, but unlike Volume 4, the film does carry over the main story beats from this volume, that being Ramona breaking up with Scott and Gideon finally coming into the story. Volume 6, however, unsurprisingly, is completely different to how the film handled things. I say unsurprisingly since Volume 6 came out around the same time as the film, meaning that the two were being worked on at the same time. As such, whereas Volume 6 has a 4-month time skip and involves Envy coming back into the story, the film has none of this. So yeah, as you can tell, a lot was cut down and abridged for the sake of the film's plot. But to be honest, this is where I have to jump in and defend the film. I know a lot of people take issue with the fact that this film leaves out a bunch of details from the comic. But coming from someone who loves the comic, I have to ask what a lot of you guys were expecting. This is a 2-hour film adapting a 6-volume comic book series. It was always going to leave out a lot. Heck, like I just mentioned, the 6th volume was being made side by side with the film, leaving Edgar Wright with only O'Malley's notes to go off of. The film was obviously going to be a different telling of the story than that of the comic. There was going to be plot lines that either couldn't be explored or could only get so much time in the spotlight. So, therefore, the focus of the film should not be to adapt as much of the comic as possible, but to take the original story and tell their own version of it, choosing to focus on the key aspects and craft a story that works in the confines of a film. And obviously, I think that they succeeded on that end.
As someone who never read the comics, I honestly didn't notice much of the cuts, possibly because the story has now taken a very different direction, making it harder to see what was originally supposed to be there. The most notable thing that I noticed was the Katayanagi twins just kinda being there for one brief scene with no backstory given for their characters, but even then, by that point, I was focused solely on Gideon.
Honestly, the Katayanagi twins have barely any personality or backstory in the comics either, but that's beside the point.
Overall, the story of the film does a great job of condensing the main ideas from the comics into a cohesive whole, and the idea of defeating 7 evil X's carries throughout, leading to a supremely engaging final battle between Scott and Gideon, with Knives initially battling Ramona, only for all of them to go ahead and kick Gideon's ass. It is spectacular, but also, man, you do not fuck with Knives because she also has her own knives to wield. I guess what they said in Knives Out is true. When people get desperate, the knives come out.
Zen, I love you, but can you please stop mentioning Knives Out in your videos? This is like the 4th time you brought it up out of 6 film reviews. We'll get to it soon, maybe next year or something.
Alright, fine. I just really want to talk about the movie, okay? On a personal level though, I love this story because of what it sets out to do. The fights against the League of Evil X's are highly entertaining and the comedic timing is on point, but at its core, this is a film and comic series about relationships. Everyone in this series has a baggage and has to work through it, and that's what drew me in just as much as all the different video game references. The characters in this film are just so flawed and human, and I think that's something that needs to be addressed. These days, people tend to dislike flawed characters for some reason, but as I said during the Kamen Rider double review, when done correctly, flawed characters work even better. Nobody is perfect in real life. We all make mistakes, and we have a choice to either let these mistakes define us or simply grow for the better. That's what Scott Pilgrim focuses on primarily. These people all have made mistakes in the past, and in most cases, they're still making them, and their character arc involves them either coming to terms with these mistakes or being defeated because of them. The evil X's do have their charming points, yes, but when you really look at them, they are abusive and toxic people. At the same time, you can really see how Ramona initially fell for most of them, and how that has changed her over time in the same way that Scott's past relationships have made him so insecure. They are both fighting to overcome their past, and that is something that I can really get behind.
This is a point that's kind of exemplified by the comics more, but it's still present in the film. Scott and Ramona have both done shitty things. Very similar shitty things, as a matter of fact. And it makes it so that the two of them are essentially made for one another. Scott is constantly making mistakes that he wants to run away from instead of learning from them. Like how he never truly apologized to Kim about their breakup, or how he was never direct to Ramona or Knives about how he cheated on them. And Ramona, in turn, is always running away from her relationships because of her own selfishness, like how she dumped Patel only 3 days after getting together with him, or how she dumped Todd Ingram because he was leaving for vegan school. She always runs away from her issues instead of facing them head on, which is shown plenty of times in the movie alone. Too many times, actually, since she disappears without a trace, leaving Scott either confused, sad, or, well, both. This is why I want to see the two get together, because they both have their demons that they need to work through, and the fact that their demons are so similar means that the two are able to learn from one another and sort out their issues as a couple. Scott and Ramona are one of my favorite romantic pairings in any medium, and a lot of it not only comes down to them being cute, because really in the confines of the movie we don't really see that a whole lot, but because in the end they are able to work through their shit, even if they come very close to falling apart. This is also why I really love the ending they went with. Oh wait, this is where we're meant to do the whole spoiler warning thing, right? Alrighty. Spoiler alert, bitches! Skip to this point if you don't want to know what happens. It's a 10-year-old movie, go watch it if you haven't seen it, blah blah blah. You get the gist of it by now. Oh, and also the ending of the comics will be discussed as well, so spoilers for that. Anyway, moving on! So after going through each of her evil exes, who we will individually touch on when we discuss the characters, Ramona decides to break up with Scott and get back together with Gideon. This is explained more by Ramona herself when Scott is... killed. Ramona explains that Gideon has a way of getting inside her head. Literally, as he implanted a chip at the back of her head to enhance her feelings for him and distance herself from other people. This is foreshadowed in several scenes beforehand, including the club scene where she holds the back of her head before saying, "I think we should split." This works as a nice abridging of the glow plotline from the comics. Essentially, in the comics, whenever Ramona's emotions got the better of her, her head would randomly start to glow. This is later explained as being something done by Gideon himself, as he implanted the glow inside Ramona's subspace highway so he could lead her back to him. The glow suppresses positive feelings inside of a person and heightens their feelings of suspicion, jealousy, and self-loathing. This makes the glow a powerful tool to destroy relationships. This also makes it so a person will be more susceptible to Gideon's manipulations, which ties it back to the chip he uses in the movie.
Whoa. That is evil. Like, Film Gideon is an abusive, evil prick, but the glow is just plain diabolical. Like freaking 4Kids level evil.
You think that's evil? That ain't even the half of it. In the movie, Gideon is focused solely on Ramona. Now, that may not entirely be the case for certain, but we're given no other information to suggest that he has any other motives. So as far as we're aware, Film Gideon set the League of Evil X's in motion as a way to bring Ramona back to him out of pure spite and his own narcissism. As if he can't deal with someone daring to break up with him. This makes for a very good final boss as far as the film is concerned. It takes Scott's character flaw of not wanting to learn from his mistakes and places it in a really creepy light. Like Scott, Gideon inflates his own self-importance, thinking that he's the most awesome dude in the world. In his own mind, he is the world's coolest dork. Although he probably wouldn't use the word dork. So when Ramona broke up with him, it wounded his pride and now he is obsessed with her. Ironic, since Ramona believes herself to be the one who's obsessed with him. It works. It works really well, but the comics take this to the next level, as there, it's not just simply about Ramona. It is shown that Gideon has his very own group of exes, all of which broke up with him, and all of which he decided to place in a cryogenic-induced coma so that he can manipulate their minds and one day have them all wake up and worship him as his many sex slaves. Girlfriends. Actually, I was right the first time. Comic Gideon is so self-absorbed that he can't let anyone break his heart. And on top of that, it's also revealed that he created the League of Evil X's in a drunken rant on Craigslist after Ramona dumped him, which I just find funny. Many people will take this deepening of his character to mean that movie Gideon is a lesser villain, but I fully disagree. I think that they both work for similar reasons. The film version for his obsession with Ramona, and the comic version for his obsession with just being loved no matter what. But I've droned on for far too long. How about you, Zen? Since you're the Scott Pilgrim comic newbie here, how did you like this ending?
While all the previous Evil X's had a presence and identity that made you root against them, Gideon really worked as a final boss for the film. You can honestly see bits and pieces of all the different X's in Gideon. He has Lucas's confidence and douchebaggery. He has Patel's pretentiousness and gaudy fashion sense. He honestly feels like an amalgamation of all the other League members rolled into one. He's a villain I really love to hate, and that worked really well for the film. So when we built up to this final boss fight, I was extremely into it, only for Scott to die. Scott's death was foreshadowed with the one-up in the previous scenes, but honestly, I didn't see it coming, and it led to one of the major points of the film for me. Scott realizes that he shouldn't have been fighting for Ramona, but instead should have been fighting for himself all along. Yes, his love for Ramona was an important part of his development, and being finally able to willingly fight for her love is the point of the film, but being willing to fight for himself is major too. He earns the power of self-respect and finally apologizes to everyone he's hurt, starting him down a path of healing and finally owning up to all of his mistakes. Scott tells Knives that he cheated on both of them, and together they take down Gideon in one amazing final battle. Gideon tries one final time to take Scott down by summoning Nega Scott, which is a representation of all Scott's negative emotions and all of his bad decisions, but by this point, Scott has come to terms with his negative side and made amends with everyone he's hurt, so Nega Scott just acts friendly towards him instead. After making plans for brunch later, we lead into the final scene of the movie. Now, originally, The finale of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World was different from the theatrical release. There's an alternate ending on the Blu-ray that shows the original idea for the finale, with Scott's death leading him, in this version, to realize that Knives has been fighting for him all along. Because of this, he fights for Knives in the end, and they end up together while Ramona goes off to heal on her own. This is how the film was going to end, however test audiences didn't like the fact that, after fighting for Ramona the entire movie, Scott decides to change his mind at the last minute and get together with Knives. So Edgar Wright and the crew changed the ending for the theatrical release so that Scott realizes that while he and Knives make a great combo, ultimately Scott and Ramona end up together because Scott's been fighting for Ramona this entire time and he's willing to work with her on whatever issues she may have. Personally, I love the theatrical ending much more. While him ending up with Knives does make sense given how well they work off each other throughout the film, I just think him gaining respect for himself is much more important and it works better with the entire plot of the film since it's always been about Scott going after Ramona because for the first time since Envy, he actually is in love. I think them working through their exes is the larger point of the film, and them ending up together is the more logical progression of events. What do you think, Phil?
Okay, so here's the thing. I know that Wright changing the ending is a big sticking point for some people who see the new ending as a hamper on this film being a true masterpiece. But honestly, I'm still glad that they decided to change the ending regardless. Like Zen said, the new ending shows Scott still willing to pursue his relationship with Ramona because now that the two have a better understanding of each other's faults, the two can move forward and help each other work past them. It may or may not work, but it's worth a shot. Scott is a character who in the end needs to learn to, well, learn from his mistakes and not run from them. This is why the Nega Scott moment in the film works so well. In the comics, Nega Scott was a threat in the plot that makes Scott realize his faults, and when he comes to terms with them, Nega Scott joins back with Scott. What can I say? O'Malley was probably playing Persona 4 while writing the last volume. In the movie though, he's already come to terms with his faults, so Nega Scott isn't a threat to him, he's just a friendly guy who wants to hang out for brunch. In turn, Ramona is a character who needs to learn not to run away from all her problems. Turning again to the comics, she runs away at the end of volume 5 to quote unquote sort herself out, but when she comes back in the final volume, she feels regret for being selfish. I know some of you may not like how much I've been comparing the film to the comics in this video, but it's important for me to do so since a lot of the criticisms launched at the film are from fans of the comics who think that everything done there is objectively better than what's done in the film. Yet I'm of the belief that the film brings justice to the comics in so many ways, even if it does so in less detail. The only important thing that you need to make sure is done is that the main themes are kept intact. And personally speaking, I don't think the original ending does a service to these themes at all. Ramona walks away alone yet again in this ending, even though at this point, there's no reason not to give this relationship a second go around. If Scott can learn to move past his weaknesses, so can Ramona, and that's why he wants to get back together with her. Like you said, Zen, Scott getting together with Knives was nice and serves the story in a different way, but I feel as if the new ending does more for the themes of the film.
Now, I don't normally bring up the writing of a film unless it's exceptionally bad or lackluster, but this script is something else. For one thing, it's insanely quotable throughout the entirety of the film, more so than even Halloween was. The entire time Phil and I were rewatching the film for notes, we couldn't stop quoting every single line, which is a sign that this script is a real winner.
Couldn't stop quoting, more like the entire chat was nothing but quotes. Yeah, the film keeps O'Malley's witty and humorous writing for each of the characters and contains some of the best lines ever put to film. I never would have imagined the line, "It's milk and eggs, bitch," would make me die laughing, but that just goes to show how good the performances are, I guess. I just wish the line, "I think we should have sex, casual sex," was kept from the comics, but that was from the final volume, so fair.
Everything in this script is just so incredibly funny. I do wish they had kept in the line where Ramona figures out he sleeps in the same bed as Wallace, and Scott says he's not gay, it's just 50% gay. Demi-gay, if you will. Also, let's all be glad we never saw the censored TV version of the film, because the edits are just plain awful, in a hilarious way. For example, they changed "you cocky cock" to "you Oscar Grouch," Yikes. They changed ass to owl, and they also changed other swears to smurf. Still, it is kind of funny to see how bad this edit is, and when I saw these scenes on the Blu-ray, I couldn't stop laughing. It really is hilarious.
I mean, we in Australia didn't censor the TV version, so I guess you Americans are just pussies. Well, anyway, the people who skipped the spoiler section are probably coming back in now, so you want to talk about the remaining characters before we move on to the technical shit?
Certainly. Well, we've already discussed Scott, Ramona, and Gideon, so we won't talk about them all too much. There is something I want to get into regarding Scott's character and how it relates to me personally, but I think I'll save that for a little later on. For now, let's discuss the other members of Sex Bob-omb, the evil exes, and any other characters of note, such as Knives and Envy. First of all, let's take a look at young Neil, who has perhaps the least development of the band members, but that's mostly because he's not as important as the rest of the cast. He's Steven's roommate and only starts being part of the band after Scott loses interest in anything but Ramona. He learns all of Scott's parts, and in the end, he takes Scott's place on the band for the final portion of the film. After Scott's death scene, he returns to the club to say that Neil has done far better than him in the band, and the sound is vastly improved as a result, saying no longer will he be known as young Neil, henceforth he shall be known as Neil.
I'll admit, I like the comic version better, where Scott just offhandedly calls him Neil to his sister, which causes Neil to get all giddy with excitement, but the movie did Neil good with this moment. Neil's a fun character, simply for the fact that he's basically just there, and not much else. Only then he ends up joining the band, and surprise, he's actually better than Scott. He doesn't really have a whole lot to his character, but I really don't mind that. Some people forget this, but not every character needs to amount to much, and that especially applies to supporting characters. There's a reason why they aren't the mains.
Speaking of which, let's talk about Steven Stills, the talent of the band, who admittedly doesn't have much of a presence in the film compared to the comic. In the film, Steven's entire character revolves around getting a contract with Gideon and nothing else. While he does have a kinda sorta relationship with Julie, a completely snarky character who hates Scott's guts, the bulk of his development comes through the band. He is obsessed with winning the Battle of the Bands, but is super insecure, and even Scott has to snap him out of it several times and remind Steven that they don't suck. By the end of the film, Steven has gained a lot more confidence as the band leader and runs it really well with a kick-ass final song.
I just wish that they included the fact that Steven is actually gay. It's a late inclusion in the comics, but Wright had the notes, so it's sad that it wasn't there. Though apparently Mark Webber, Steven's actor, knew about the character being gay and portrayed him with that in mind, bleeding it into his mannerisms. So that's cool. Steven may not have had much to go off in the film, though to be honest, despite having more screen time in the comics, he also didn't really have much of an arc there as well. In fact, I'd say that his arc of becoming dedicated to the band and becoming more of a competent leader is better in the film since they make it more of a clear arc. As well as the fact that in the comics, Sex Bob-omb breaks up, leaving Scott and Kim to start their own garage band purely for fun. So, +1 for the movie in that regard. So yeah, like Neil, Steven is another fun character, and in the comics case, a total gay icon. And speaking of gay icons, let's talk about my personal favorite character in the series, Kim Pines.
Kim Pines, the drummer of the Sex Bob-ombs, has a much larger impact on the film, mostly because of her history with Scott. You can tell from the very moment she first appears on screen that she completely and utterly hates Scott's guts for something personal, and the longer the film goes on, the more snarky she gets with her replies. However, later on in the film, Kim helps Scott get Ramona back, so it does feel like she holds some affection towards him, however small. When Scott finally apologizes to her at the end of the movie, she takes it to heart and is much nicer to him as she starts up a new song that is far more energetic for the band.
I love Kim. I'll say that even though I think Ramona has more depth as a character, Kim's the one who I got the most enjoyment out of. It's often a plus for me when your character exudes enough snark to power a fucking Marvel movie, and Kim is the queen of deadpan in this regard. But not only that, she's a great character in her own right as well. Scott hurt her when they broke up, and ever since then, she can't stand to look at him repeating the same bullshit over and over again, expecting life to go on as if he's not still a total idiot. Some may think it's because she hates his guts, but I say it's because, to a degree, she still loves him, and I don't even think it's buried very deep down. And this is where the comic comes into play. I think in regards to comic to movie transitions, Kim took it the hardest. She's meant to be a main character, but she's given as much time as Steven to show her arc in the film, and it's probably one of the only things I actually take issue with in regards to the film. If you couldn't tell already, I'm very forgiving when it comes to things you need to change when turning a comic into a movie, so I'm not even asking for much here. I just think that 2 or 3 scenes dedicated to Kim probably would have ironed out the issues I had with her in the film. Believe it or not, there was actually a shot that released prior to the film coming out that aired on Adult Swim called Scott Pilgrim vs. the Animation. This short covers the flashback shown at the beginning of Volume 2 of the comics, where we see Scott and Kim's past and how they broke up. It's a really fun short, and it's especially great to see Lisa in some form or another, but as fans of the comics will already know, this flashback is a load of shit. Scott never fought a bunch of bullies to reach Simon at the top of the school's building to save Kim. Simon was in fact a dorky little kid who was dating Kim until Scott came around and threatened him, causing Kim and Kim to get together. And then when it came time for Scott to move to Toronto, he didn't even tell Kim about it, contrary to what the flashback shows, leaving Kim to hear about it from Lisa. We get to see the real reason why Kim is so mad at Scott in the final volume. Now, like I've said 1,000 times in this review, it's understandable why they couldn't be more in depth with this, given the fact that this was in the final volume. But like I also said, I'm not really asking for much. We get a scene where Scott makes reference to needing to battle bullies in high school to get to Kim, but we don't get to follow up on it. I honestly think we get too little of these two together in the film, especially since Scott kisses Kim in the comics, to which Kim goes along with before cutting him off. It's clear that there's still a lot of feelings there between the two, especially since Kim kisses Scott a final time later on, and it's not shown to its full extent in the film, which is sad to me. How about you, Zen?
I personally like Kim in the film, but I can see where you're coming from. We don't get a ton of backstory outside of the enormous amounts of subtext with every snarky word she says. There's a lot you can read into the film, but at the same time, I would like just a bit more about their history and their past relationship. Granted, the animation does help a bit, but it doesn't answer a lot of questions I have, and altogether, I wish we had some discussion of it at some point in the film. Still, at the end of the day, I love Kim's character. She's so damn fun to watch, and the bit at the end where Scott apologizes to her really got to me.
Yeah, for all my problems, Kim's role in the film is still serviceable, and I do enjoy her presence every time she is on screen, helped by the fact that Alison Pill does a great job portraying her.